half of that is as an industry professional, mainly in Asia Pacific, in arranging sort of driving business transformation projects, and about half of my career has been as a researcher in Australia, leading a research group in circular economy. And I have with me joining Michael, who's a professor, Alfred Deakin professor at Deakin University, and who's also the head of the Department of Marketing at Deakin. So Michael is with a lot of experience, a wealth of experience in the area of environmental marketing, who has published books, articles, conference papers, and has a very extensive research track record representing the environmental marketing, consumer behavior, and a lot of other topics. And with us, we have Aryana, who's currently doing a research project funded by the Australian Research Council, one of the industrial transformation research hubs, which is called TREMS, Transformation of Waste Resources into Engineered Solutions and Materials for a Circular Economy. So we would be sharing some insights from Aryana's projects today, and I think I'll leave it up to him to talk about it further, and to Michael. And so the intro part is by me. So we have kind of divided into a couple of sections. So the first part, I will talk a little bit about sustainable procurement policy setting, a few things about terminology, as well as what are some of the things you need to essentially look at as in determining whether your policy setting facilitates operationalization. And in the second part, Michael and Aryana will share some of their research findings on a research they have done on the councils, probably a large number of councils within Victoria, and assessing the effectiveness of their policy. So at the end, we have actually approximately 25 minutes set aside for questions and the panel discussion. So this is the part where we would really love your interaction. This is sort of only approximately half of the time is allocated for sharing, and the rest half for dialogue. So it'll be great to have your questions and examples brought in to have a good conversation. I'll start my presentation. So firstly, about why procurement is such a big topic and why it's so important. So with procurement, we kind of place a lot of importance of it because of the power that it gives. Procurement is about having money to purchase something, and when we exercise that purchasing power, we get to influence what we buy and the demand, and then consumption, and a lot of other things that are connected to and related to it. So this is very prominent for public sector organizations, especially with government being government having such a lot of purchasing power. So typically, I think Aryana has in his presentation some of the statistics. 15 to 30% of a country's GDP is government purchasing, and in Australia it has been like around 30%, 26.8 and 31.6, which is quite substantial. So with having such purchasing power, what we can see is that I mean, as a consumer, you have your own purchasing power. You're able to contribute to influencing demand in a certain way, and if you have a certain attribute that you want to promote in your ecosystem, you kind of promote that by advocating and using that purchasing power. So when it comes to policy setting, I think that's why it is. I mean, we are kind of placing emphasis on having consistency in influencing that through policy. So I'll probably go to the topic where we talk about what are some of the essential ingredients for operationalizing policy. So this is a research that we did. So when I was a part of Deakin University, we did 2 research projects at the time. This is the team. 2 studies understanding the barriers and drivers for environmental procurement. One was a study that we did checking what was done globally, which was as a systematic review. And the second one was a pilot study analyzing the case for Australia specifically. So in the whole context of procurement, we looked at one specific aspect, that is what's the influence around, or what are the drivers and barriers for purchasing of products with recycled and recovered content by local councils, which is sort of a small subsegment we specifically looked at. So the councils, or the data collection was done in, sorry, I didn't plan to have any animation. So in terms of the pilot project that we did, we had a regional city, one council in regional Victoria, and a council in metropolitan Melbourne sort of looked at, and we interviewed people and gathered data through consultation of them. These people represented multiple roles. So people in environment, sustainability, policy, procurement projects, city services, and other waste management related functions. I will not share the entire findings, but the three key questions we had to look at was, what are the main barriers for councils to purchase products of recycled and recovered content, and trying to understand how do buying centers in councils and government organizations operate. So buying centers are sort of specific units which influence purchasing within organizations. Sometimes there's a technical decision involving purchasing, and there's a financial decision involving purchasing. And these people who are involved in those decisions come together in making that purchasing decision. And the last one is based on what we find as troublesome or these influences. What are the key interventions that we need to increase purchasing of products with recycled content? So these two papers with the two research studies we did, we published 2 papers. Now going to the policy aspect. So I will not share the entire graph on the graphic on the right hand side. So in this specifically with the study done for Australia, there were 6 key things that we identified as a main driver or a barrier, and policy was one of them. Now, if we look at policy, I'll probably go a little bit more deeper into discussing what were the key actors or the roles performed by policy in this setting. So policy plays a couple of roles in driving demand for environmental products. So when I say environmental products, it could be products which are in line with circular economy, which I will talk about a little bit more later in the next slide. It could be products with recycled content, or products that drive objectives of decarbonization. Anything which has an environmental attribute or a concern is what I'm talking about. So the first role is it determines priorities in programs, projects, and work. So if you think of an organization, the policy sets a common direction for the organization to act on, which usually gets reflected in its goals. It goes to the organization's objectives. It gets driven down to functional objectives, department objectives, and then finally goes to the individual objectives. So with that way, the implementation of the policy is facilitated at multiple levels, and there's sufficient clarity made at different levels of the organization that this is the area we want to work on, this is what we are going to deliver, this is what we are going to achieve. So what you need to do, as well as the outcomes that you're expected to achieve, gets clear in a sort of with an implementation mechanism if you have that sort of a structure. So that's one role. Second one, with policy, it communicates a clear directive in procurement decisions. So if you have a number of alternatives, and sometimes you have procedural tools like certifications driving your decisions, sometimes you have very absolute foundational sort of analytical tools like life cycle assessment or carbon footprint assessment or any other sort of environmental criteria driving your decisions. So in any context, having a policy telling that we have a certain emphasis on this criteria helps choosing alternatives by the staff who are involved with much better clarity. That's the second role. And the third one is what we found very interesting in the study was that some people had the belief and the perception that if they work on using, let's say, for example, recycled material, they're doing something out of their job. So the work that they put in, there was the internal organization, the system of performance and the system of performance measurement didn't have a sort of a way of recognizing the work that they put in um, um, into basically driving change in this area. So if there's a clear policy, which again gets driven to individual objectives, it creates a space and also clarity for the staff that what they work in this area is not actually not out of job or not as a favor or not as an additional thing to the job. They feel like they are doing their job by contributing to that. So that's the third part that needs to set in the policy, or rather the third role that the policy plays in a good implementation mechanism. And the fourth one is about resources in changing and transformation. Now, if I give an example for this one, a lot of the initiatives around in driving a circular economy, or even things around using recycled content or green initiatives, there are lots of things that are new and currently not existing in the market. So a lot of them require searching for new suppliers, so trying to find there's an alternative in the market which can do this job. So the idea that you have to trial, you have to, there'll be trial and error, there'll be new learning, there's allocation and provisions that need to be kept for additional search, risk sharing for people to learn. So all of this actually need time and resources. So having a clear policy should play the role that there's a clear direction that organization sets resources and allocations and provisions for changing and transformation, which could be additional resources for sharing or sharing risks, additional time for learning, additional time for trial and error, etc. So those four things need to be generally fulfilled by the way that you set policy if you want to drive something forward with that policy. Now, before I hand over to Aryana, one slide to just set context on some of the terminology we use. So we have a couple of things, a couple of terminology related to procurement. So sustainable procurement is one, green procurement is one, circular procurement is one. So sustainable procurement as a whole is thinking of all the three dimensions of social, environmental, and economic. Environmental procurement in general, in the context that we talk today, is about in a procurement decision, you have consideration for environment. So it's the earlier definition used to be that you choose products with negative impact, but if you're actually thinking aligned with principles of circular economy, you would think about selecting products with positive impact or regenerative impact. Now, circular procurement is a bit more different, but a very critical angle. That is where you challenge the demand for products and challenge and check whether do you need this product to supply this service that you're trying to purchase, which has a bit more additional element, but it is a part of environmental procurement as well, because what it leads to is creating a positive environmental impact. So sustainable is as a whole, social, economic, and environment. Environment is the generic term we use. I would say it's a bit of a technical term. People call it green procurement. I think being a researcher, I would rather use environmental procurement because green is a terminology we sometimes use to describe minor improvements. So circular procurement has a bit of a different and a more extended scope, where it's not just about purchasing products, but you rather challenge the demand to think whether you need a product or whether you need a service. So in just a bit of a brief idea before I hand over to Michael and Aryana to share the research findings of their procurement policy.